Our kids battle things in their lives, and you are either going to hop in and solve it for them, basically take over their fight. And am I going to get in that ring and fight the fight for them? I should not. My goal is, and my role is to be their coach. I'm outside that ring, but I'm a safe person. So a lot of times they turn to us and they put their fists up and they want to fight against us because we're a little safer than what they're really battling. Our role as a parent is to turn our children back around and say, no, this is the enemy. This is what you're fighting against. And now here's how you do it.
Hi, welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast. This podcast is brought to you by BJU Press Homeschool. Homeschooling is an exciting adventure we take with our children. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is choosing the curriculum you want to use. BJU Press Homeschool is a curriculum you can trust. All the books, resources, and videos have been designed with you and your child in mind. Their curriculum is educationally robust and rich, taking into account that children have different learning styles, strengths, and needs. Mom, you are in charge. BJU Press Homeschool is here to come alongside and support you. Do you need help with the teaching load, or is there a subject you just don't want to teach? Their amazing video courses are available for all grades and almost every subject. BJU Press Homeschool believes that homeschooling can produce a new generation of students who know God, love their neighbors, and stand firm in their faith. For more information, go to bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast, where our goal is to help you thrive in your homeschool journey. Let me take just a minute to ask you to please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen or watch, including YouTube. And if this podcast has been encouraging to you, please leave us a 5-star review. Each review really helps us. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We post a lot of content there. We have a great episode in store for you today. I'm excited to welcome my friend Peggy Ployhar to the podcast. Peggy is a physicist turned home educator who left a lucrative career in the medical device industry to teach the struggling learners in her own home after her oldest son's diagnosis with Asperger's syndrome. She is also the founder and CEO of SPED Homeschool, an organization that continues to grow by leaps and bounds. And just so you know, Peggy has some mad aerial skills. So stay tuned. I think you will be really encouraged by this podcast. Well, Peggy, I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to have you on the podcast today. I've enjoyed our time together. We were together at a Foundation Summit meeting that our sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool, hosts. And I just have always admired you and your work. And I'm so thankful for all the work you've done in the area of children with special needs. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited this worked out to be able to have this chat.
I know, me too. So I want you to tell me a little bit about your family, how you got into homeschooling to begin with, and then how it kind of everything progressed from there.
Yes. So my homeschooling journey started out with a lot of resistance from me. There were some people at our church. We were living in Oregon at that time where both my boys were born. And some very loving fellow church members said, oh, you should really come to this homeschool conference when I had preschoolers. And I went and I came home and I said to my husband, those are not my people. Oh, where can we take him to go to school? And so when he entered kindergarten age, he went to a private school. And he was in the principal's office every day. And I had a very loving principal at this school. And she would work with him. But she finally sat me down. And I thought, oh, my goodness, what am I doing wrong that is making this child this way? I put all the blame on myself.
Right.
And she goes, I think you need to have him tested. And I'm like, tested for what? I was oblivious to anything. I have a degree in physics. I did not teach. I worked with engineers who are wired a lot like my son. And,
Interesting.
Yeah. So he came back and he was diagnosed with high functioning autism. And back then they called it Asperger's. And the second I walked back in her office with that diagnosis, because she couldn't diagnose him, she handed me a pile of articles from educational periodicals that she read. And at that time, there was only 1 or 2 books that even existed on high functioning autism.
So
That's how
what
early
time
he was
frame
diagnosed.
what time frame are we talking
That
about?
was in about 2003.
Okay.
Yeah. And really, I mean, there were, forums on the internet. The internet was pretty pretty new.
Yes, yes.
So there really wasn't a lot of resources. And so we prayed about it, and I'm like, "Oh, this is," every place I thought of putting him, they're like, "We can keep him back." The problem was he was talking about committing suicide at the age of 5 because he was so depressed where he was at. How he
Oh, boy,
related
that's
to me.
hardcore. Yes.
Yeah, he
Oh,
related to
boy.
me. He said, "Mom, it's like God laid an egg, and that's me, and a snake has come and swallowed me up." That was his description of how he felt at age 5, and I was like,
Whoa.
"We can't do this. We can't go back to the private school and have all those kids looking at him as he's the one who failed and was a behavior issue." We couldn't put him into the private school because he was so intelligent, because they put him in a special ed program, and he'd feel even worse about himself, and so
Right,
homeschooling was
right.
really my only option. And so we struggled through it, and I was dealing with depression and anger issues at the same time when he came home, and I thought, "Okay, God, this is just a a storm just waiting to explode." And, over the years, we homeschooled for 19 years. He's 27 now. Um, that changed both of us. But it was a huge, huge leap of faith for me to say, "Okay, God, I know you are gonna do something good with what I can't even handle at this point, and I'm just
Right,
gonna trust
right.
in you to lead us through it."
Oh, man, and look what God did. Would you have ever, during that first year where you were just trying to make it through each day with both of you alive and intact, would you have
Yeah.
ever would you have ever imagined what you're doing now?
No, I was ready to go back to work. That was my game plan. As I was an engineer, I did project management, and I worked in the biomedical field. I loved it, and little by little, God changed my heart to love something even more. And now I look back on my life and I go, "Well, that would have been a miserable life." And seeing what I get to do now. So yeah.
I know. Isn't it something when God takes our plans that we think are so good and
Yeah,
it's a hard pill to swallow, but then it ends up I
very
mean,
much.
that's how I feel about homeschooling. I never wanted to teach or have kids.
Yeah.
And, so I've spent my whole adult life talking either teaching or talking about teaching your kids. And I'm like you, it would have been such a boring life to
Yeah,
have had what I thought I wanted. And
exactly. Yes, so much better.
at the end of the day, Peggy, is God puts us, I think, where he can use us most for his kingdom and his
Absolutely.
glory. And I think about all the families you've impacted. I mean, really, the story of SPED is just an amazing story. So, if you don't
Yeah.
mind, tell me Tell me how your understanding of special needs grew and how you ended up developing an organization that started at one place and ended at another place.
So the story actually started not only within my own home, but it started in my larger biological family. When I graduated from high school and went to college, my parents started adopting. So I have now 10 adopted siblings, all with special needs, as
Wow.
well as my 3 biological siblings. And so when they saw homeschooling starting to work for me, my parents looked at each other and went, "Well, we should probably be doing that," because they had kids that were bedbound, and had high medical needs, and then after that had a lot of trauma issues, and so the school system was failing them greatly, and so that grew my understanding just because of the way our family dynamics changed and knowing what it was like to deal with a lot more than I was even dealing with at home, walking it through with my parents. How do you teach in these situations? What resources do you use? And And before I started homeschooling, I actually was the area coordinator for MOPS International for Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So I did a lot of leadership training.
Wow.
And so after I had stepped away from that and homeschooled for a while, I really felt like God was calling me to speak, and that I had that was kind of a ministry that I really felt called to. And so the Minnesota Association of Christian Home Educators put out a call. We were looking for a special needs coordinator, and I was like, well, I kind of have the background. I've maybe like 3 or 4 steps ahead of most of these parents, but why not? And so they brought me on board as their first special needs consultant. Um,
Wow.
and then when we moved to Texas, I worked for the Texas Homeschool Coalition in that same capacity.
Right.
The problem is as I did that for a decade for both of those 2 organizations, I found that as soon as I got parents settled with, okay, the panic's over, you're going to be okay. This is what you need to do, and good luck because I have nowhere to send you.
Right. Right.
And I could give them curriculum, but there was no support. There was no vetting of resources. There was nothing. And so as I prayed and prayed about it, I was working for the Texas Homeschool Coalition at that point, and God just kept saying, wait. Early in the year of 2018 or 2017, actually, he had me buy the URL for SPED Homeschool. And I had no idea I was gonna do with it. I thought, "Oh, great, I'm gonna start a blog," you know, just like everybody else.
And tell us real
And
quick what SPED stands for.
so it in the school context, it stands for special ed, but we call it specialized education because
Oh, I
every
like
child
that.
that struggles
Yes, yes.
needs that specialized education.
And
Mhm.
every child struggles, maybe just in different
Yes,
ways, so
different
every
ways.
child really needs
Mhm.
a specialized education, which is why
They
homeschooling
do.
is so
Yes.
glorious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And parents just really struggle sometimes with how do I do that? And so that's what we focus on is connecting them with resources and providers and ideas that make them feel not alone and equipped to do that. So yeah, so it ended up I founded a nonprofit which I had no desire to lead in 2017 and then launched our podcast at that time, which is now Empowering Homeschool Conversations. And it's just grown from that. And now we reach internationally an audience that is continually growing. And so, yeah,
That is amazing. When did you work with MOPS? Were you already homeschooling at that point, or was that
I was not
before?
homeschooling
Okay,
then. Yeah, that was
okay,
before when my kids were preschoolers.
okay. And so they were preschoolers. Were you still working, or were you home at that point?
I was home. Yeah, I when we prayed about it, my husband and I actually was making twice as much as he was when I quit my job, because I was in a field I was actually up for a vice president position when I got pregnant with my oldest, and my boss took me in and he said, "You are making the largest mistake of your life walking away from this career," and I thought, "No, I really feel called. I need to stay home." And so my husband said, "We'll just make it work." And we we took that cut in income and God gave him an opportunity that actually allowed his income to triple. So he
Wow.
replaced it, but it was a walk of faith. Can we trust that God is going to provide in this? And so yeah, so I started staying home, but it never was my plan to stay
To
home
keep
permanently.
staying home.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah.
So how did the situation with MOPS work out?
It was good. I actually
I mean,
I kinda
I guess
got
how did
roped
you
into
yeah, I was gonna
yeah,
say,
I
how
got
did you get
roped into
involved in
leading the group in the
leadership?
first
Yeah.
place.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was leading a Bible study at my house because I really felt my kids would be most exposed to the gospel if they saw you talking about it.
Yes,
And
yes.
and so I invited some ladies over. When we lived in Oregon, I got a taste of what not just what a churchgoer was, but what a person who lived their faith out was like. So when we came back to Minnesota, I thought, I've got to tell people about this. God can talk to you. You got to, yeah, I mean, I was super excited. And so So we were called to a church that was rather dead, and I was like, "Okay, I feel like I need to do something." So I had ladies come over to my house, we did Bible study, our kids played together, and one of them said, you really need to start a MOPS group." I had been to a couple when we were living with some contract work my husband was doing, and I was like, okay." And that group grew, and it grew into 3 groups very
Wow.
quickly.
Wow.
Um, and then that's when I took over the area coordinating, and so I was leading,
For 3 states,
leadership
that's pretty
classes and
remarkable. Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That was I know it's changed the name now. MOPS has changed its name. I don't know if
Yes.
it's changed the mission or not, but that was really such a nice, place for moms of preschoolers to find each other in fellowship.
Absolutely, and get good teaching and
Yeah,
mentors instantly, because those
yeah.
mentors were kind of part of the package.
And
Absolutely.
so I'm sure that was a formative time for you in terms of other things you were gonna be called to later on in the homeschooling community.
Yeah, so working with so many nonprofits really helped shape what I really understood about how does a nonprofit work? How do you, work with a lot of volunteers? Because I have no trouble asking people to donate their money, their time. and God was very good in growing me in that, because we all want to give, but
Yes.
sometimes we lack in understanding of how we can do that effectively from where we're at in our whatever phase of life we're in.
Well, that is so powerful. So then, after SPED after MOPS is when you started homeschooling.
Yes, actually, my third was born, and I had been homeschooling a little bit, but that kind of tipped me over the edge, and I said, I got to walk away from one of these things, and homeschooling and my baby are not one of them. So mom's
Yes.
kind of took the
Yeah, yeah,
had to take
yeah.
the hit.
So you've got 3 children?
I do. I have 2 boys. They're now 27, 25, and my daughter's 20.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay, so I also wanna go back to something you said, is that you felt like your child's situation was your fault.
Yes.
Um, I had my oldest son and probably like you, I was an A student in school, and I was focused, and I didn't need any external help in getting my work done. I was
Right.
just driven, I did it. And so Ty was born, and he was all movement and talking. And I
Right.
was, the first year we homeschooled, I was but it was just an archaic law, but I had to use a curriculum that was being used in our district, and I knew I wanted to use something Christian. This is '84, there are just basically no choices, which is
Right.
how I got,
Yeah.
involved with BJU Press then because there was a choice. But the
Right.
first curriculum we used, it would say for the kindergarten, I want your children to fold their hands,
Oh my goodness.
put their feet on the floor, look you in the eye. And so I would
Right.
read, it was like 2 paragraphs of instructions about how they were supposed to be still and quiet and raise their
Right.
hands and not talk. And well, it was like I spent 6 months in misery. And finally, I just told the Lord one morning, I am failing at this. If this is what homeschooling is, I cannot do it. And then just God is so sweet the way he leads us. I went to this little toy boutique where they had the Brio train set we couldn't afford, and the kids would
Yes.
play, and I'd sit in their book corner and read. And I just picked up this book, Growing Up Learning, I think is probably OP, out of print now. And
Yeah.
and it was by this PhD, and he just started talking about the 3 ways kids learn. Their audio, auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. So basic now, but not a big topic then. And
Yeah, no, it
he
wasn't.
you know,
Mhm.
he started talking about auditory kinesthetic children, kids who learn by moving and talking, neither of which are, acceptable in a classroom. They're just not acceptable behavior. You've gotta be still and quiet.
Right.
And so he said, "But if you can get those kids out of school, they'll make some of the most productive people in life." And these bells and whistles are going off in my head because I just kept thinking, Lord, it's my fault that I can't have these children that sit with their hands folded and listen to my every word, raise their hand to speak, and then do their workbook page, you know? And
Exactly.
and so it was like I call that day, Independence Day in our homeschooling, where I
Oh,
realized God
yeah.
made them this way for a reason, and it's nobody's fault, it's His design. And,
Right.
but boy, that was a huge hurdle for me to get over. So when you talk about
Yeah.
that and you alleviate that stress in people's lives, Peggy, that's such a gift.
It is, and what helped me to realize that I wasn't the change maker in their life. I was not to be controlling all of it, and it's very important as a parent that you realize this because, I mean, your kids get older and you're not gonna be able to control things.
Yes, that's
So,
right, right.
um, yeah, so you need to put yourself there. Our kids battle things in their lives, and you are either going to hop in and solve it for them, basically take over their fight. I like to look at it as a boxing ring. And am I gonna get in that ring and fight the fight for them? I should not. My goal is and my role is to be their coach. I'm outside that ring, but I'm a safe person, so a lot of times they turn to us and they put their fists up and they wanna fight against us because we're a little safer than what they're really battling.
Yes,
But
yes.
our role as a parent is to turn our children back around and say, "No, this is the enemy. This is what you're fighting against, and now here's how you do it." And because we have the wisdom and experience to take them through that. And when I was able to picture that in my mind and say, okay, this is my role, I was able to let go of a lot of my parenting anger because a lot of it was conflict between my children and I wasn't able to see it because I have had the same sensory issues as my children do. And I could never calm myself down enough to see things clearly. We now realize that we all have a connective tissue disorder, and that causes the vagus nerve to stay stuck into that fight or flight. I have now learned ways physically to release that, and to deal with that, but it was just finally diagnosed about a year and a half ago for my youngest daughter, and now we're realizing through that that I'm the carrier and all my kids have it. And so it was misdiagnosed actually as autism, but it is a connective tissue disorder.
Oh, that is so interesting, Peggy.
Yeah.
Wow. That's life-changing.
It is huge, and it makes things so much easier to manage in realizing that, yeah, there's some things that just didn't make sense, but now, right, as the truth is revealed, we can move forward a lot easier.
Now, do you think that's the case with other children who have been diagnosed with autism, or is this just a unique thing that happened to you and your family?
I'm thinking that it probably is much more, relative to others as well. The disorder is called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and there's actually 12 different ways it can manifest. Um, and I know talking with Heidi St. James, she, said that she's also a carrier as well, and some of her kids
Interesting.
have had issues with this. And so, yes, it actually affected my heart when I was younger, and my daughter has to take heart medication because your blood pools up, and if you change position too quickly and your body isn't used to it, it'll cause your heart to start skipping beats. And so,
Wow.
with me being upside down all the time and spinning around in circles, my heart has actually gotten used to it, and so the training that I do in aerial has actually helped my body to be able to cope with other things, and so I actually need it in order to continue living healthily, which is kinda weird.
Wow, that is such an amazing story. It's so you and I both have a lot of food allergies, and we've talked
Yes.
about this a lot. And it was amazing how when my doctor diagnosed me with these, it alleviated a lot of my migraines. It also
Yeah.
alleviated depression and some other, and I've wondered how many people are walking around with food allergies to dairy or gluten or whatever it is, not realizing it, not understanding how that can affect your whole everything. It can
Oh,
affect you
absolutely.
mentally, emotionally, physically. It's not just physical. And
Yes.
I can remember
It's because it's become your norm, and you think, "Oh, this is just the way it always feels." But when you change it and then it doesn't feel that way, it's like, "Oh my goodness, I've been
whoa,
living all this way," and not
yes.
realizing how much why my I was inflamed, I was in pain, um, because you start to ignore that that isn't normal.
Yes, that's right. You accept it as normal because that's how you feel
Yeah,
every day. And, so that's pretty interesting. I had a friend, I had been, gluten-free, dairy-free, all those things free for a couple of years, but I never understood the mental component of it really until a friend of
right.
mine who was also gluten-free said she had taken her kids on a field trip, and she said, "Finally, my kids looked at me and said, 'Mommy, what did you eat today?'" And she said, "Well, I did have a cheeseburger." They said, "Well, when you eat gluten, you're mean."
Oh,
And I thought, out of the mouth of babes, but I started
right,
examining those things because there's some things you've never thought about before.
right,
And it's so I can't
absolutely.
even imagine with something. I mean, food allergies are systemic to be sure, but
Yep.
but to have something like a connective tissue disorder and not know it, is it in any way like Marfan's or not? I know that Marfan's is a connective tissue
I'm not
disorder.
too familiar with that.
Okay, we have a friend, and they think that's maybe what Abraham Lincoln had, and it's unusually tall people,
Oh, okay.
and, so that it's just interesting. We've studied that because of our friend, and, but
Yeah, absolutely,
but what a journey you've been on, and being able to share
absolutely.
those things with people that is life changing for those people who have this.
Oh,
Wow.
yes. Yeah.
So, okay, so now you're in Texas, and you're working with and you're wor and you're
Roundabout story, yes.
yeah, yeah, that's right, and it was my fault, I took all the detours. And you're working with THSC. How old are your kids at this point?
My daughter was, 10, and then my my middle one was 15, and my oldest was 17 and living in Florida because he graduated actually a year early. This was the one that got kicked out of
Right.
school, and he was at welding school in Florida, living on his own.
Wow, that is amazing. What is he doing today?
He is a biomedical engineer. So he came back from welding school and said, "Mom, I don't think that's my calling." And so I said, "Well, then you need to pray about what your calling is." And he goes, "Well, I think God is calling me to go to college," which was never a discussion when we homeschooled. I was very thankful that I prayed every year before I decided what to teach him, and I did teach him calculus and
Yeah,
physics
right,
and
yes,
all
yes.
the sciences because I thought he loves this stuff. So I'm not going to cut it out just because he said that's not a future goal. So his transcript was ready to go straight to college, and he graduated, and yeah, now he designs using 3D technology. He works with surgeons to design plates to fit into people's jaws and skulls that are customized. And so, if they have surgery or they have an accident or a tumor that needs to remove part of the bone, then he uniquely creates this piece. They 3D print it in titanium and ship it around the world to surgeons to use to put into people's skulls. It's kinda cool.
Okay, so this is another lesson, I think a homeschool lesson that you've unearthed for us. But, there are a lot of kids who say, we don't want to go to college. And so your temptation is to not do any of those, maybe what are considered college prep
Yes.
courses, like the sciences and the maths and maybe the foreign language. But
Right.
so many kids change their mind. And
Oh,
like
absolutely.
my oldest son, we always knew he was going to college. He was a soccer player, and the things he wanted to do in life would have required a college degree. But
Yeah.
I mean, I had one son who was so science oriented, John. That was not Ty, my mover, talker, salesman guy,
Right.
And but I thought, we have got to do these sciences. And so this was the first time ever somebody had come into my life and said, "Hey, I'm going to teach a class for homeschool kids in
Ah,
biology
uh-huh.
and do the labs." And it turned out Mr. Steinbauer did biology, chemistry, and physics. And
Oh,
I
that's
thought,
awesome.
and so I thought, okay, Ty, you're doing this. It's an opportunity. Well, the interesting thing is, Peggy, he got into, I mean, he's just a natural salesman. He taught, what he did at home. He talks and he moves and he's so
You're
people
right.
oriented. And so he got into medical device sales. And lo and
Oh,
behold,
yeah.
they flew him up to Boston, and he had to take a few of the courses from medical school that are the do or die, make or break courses, and he had to
Yeah.
pass them. And I'm thinking,
Wow.
Lord, thank you that he was at least exposed to those things. I thought science was a
Right.
non sequitur to him, just a non starter. And it ends up being his career. Now, he left medical device sales, and he's also in 3D printing technology. And so you never
Yep.
know where your children are gonna end up, and,
Yes, exactly. It's those hobbies. Let them explore them.
yes,
My
yes.
daughter was complete opposite. She figured she was gonna be a tattoo artist. That was her her calling. She and but she never really made any plans. And she started school when she was 3 because she's like, "Where are my books?"
Right,
And she's
right.
just very gifted. And so by the time she finished high school, she actually had enough credits to graduate 3 times.
Wow.
And so I just said, let's build your transcript when you figure out what you're going to do. And I won't graduate you until you know what your next steps are.
Yeah,
And so that's
brilliant,
why
brilliant
it ended up
strategy. Yes.
going the way it did. And so, yeah, so then when she worked for a year, taking a gap year in retail, she's like, oh, I know I want a college degree and I know exactly what I want to do. Um, and so now she's in college and she's working towards doing archival science. So she loves to she's like, "Oh," I'm like, "You get paid to be a hoarder doing that." It's kind of a fun
Oh, maybe
job.
that's my
Yes.
calling.
So
Oh.
yes, but then we were able to build her transcript based with the credits that would help her the best with, the college entrance and all those things. And
So
so,
so tell me the
yeah,
name
it
of the
all works out.
profession again, an archival what did you
Archival science, so it's similar to library science,
Okay.
except she would be working more with, like, museum archives, but there's now a huge, huge demand in this field for digital archiving because
Yes,
all of
yes.
these companies have just these databases that are overflowing, and they don't know what to do, they don't know what to keep, and so she's taking some of those classes too, just as a backup, that her big thing is art history, and she just loves all of that, but yeah.
That is so amazing. Okay, just one more question about that. How
Yeah.
did going into resale retail sales confirm with your daughter that she wanted to be an archival
Ah, yes.
designer or archive
I had
scientist?
no
Yes.
idea. Right, so she met a lot of her managers and my daughter is very relational, and so she got to know all of these people working there and their life stories, and she realized how much most of them were feeling like they were stuck in a place in their life where they could not get any more education to advance anymore. And she's like, I don't want to be that where and plus this was happening right as COVID happened. And so the store decided she was working with JCPenney's and they decided to let Sephora go and they were going to put their own beauty department in. So her at age 17, 18, she was put in charge of changing over that entire department.
Wow. That's
And
amazing.
so they trained her on all the new cosmetics that were coming in and said, "Okay, this is the way the store needs to be set up." And she's such a detail-oriented person that she meticulously put that whole department together. And I think she realized at that point just how much she likes categorizing things, which is
Oh, isn't that
crazy.
interesting? Yeah.
Her room is a disaster, but she can categorize other people's stuff.
So yeah, yeah. Interesting. That is so interesting. So she's
Yeah.
in college now and she's working on that degree.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you for joining Peggy and me today for part 1 of this 2-part episode as we discussed how to homeschool the struggling learner in your life. You can find Peggy at spedhomeschool.com. And as always, you can find me at zantyler.com and on social media. May God continue to bless you and your family. And until next time, bye.